Hello computer cooks and welcome to the Retro Recipes kitchen. Now in a recent video I showed you an incredible extreme Commodore 64C refurb by my friend Pete. Well, Pete's back and so am I. Wait till you see the condition that this Atari 800 XL was in before he got to work on it. Now that Commodore 64 had a lot of issues inside, I mean a lot, and by issues I mean mud. Well, this one has issues inside and out. Look at that case. Pete's on the case, and so am I. So please sit back and enjoy this musical pictorial journey of restoring another one of our beloved retro machines back to its former glory. Welcome to Retro Recipes. Now, although the Commodore 64 was my first love, and the Apple IIe was the first computer my parents ever brought home, those of you who subscribed will know that the Atari 400 was the first computer I ever owned. But little did I know back then that it actually had a big sister, the Atari 800 XL. Actually a cost-reduced Atari 800 with worse compatibility and a fuzzier, dirtier picture. And speaking of dirty pictures, here's one for you. But on the bright side, the protective film is still on the badge. So the story behind this is that a user called TDC posted in a forum that he had this Atari 800 XL that was, quote, unrefurbishable. Great word. And so Pete responded, nothing's unrefurbishable. And so this Atari 800 was soon after gifted to Pete. And the challenge was accepted. Let's start with the case. How's it going, Atari? Hanging a bit to the left? Oh dear. Well, let's take a hot gun to that. Sounds painful. Actually quite a simple remedy. Just heat up the plastic until it becomes pliable, and then exert some pressure using that pin. Hey presto, nice and straight. But what about the cracks in the case? Well, a soldering iron is what you use, but no solder. Just run the soldering iron over the plastic to mold it back onto the other half.
Tell me what you want me to do.
But we have bigger fish to fry. So it's time to give this a nice soapy bath. It's looking better, but the bath hasn't quite cured all of the broken slats. Dozens of them. What you're going to need are some metal pins, dozens of them. Then you take a Bunsen burner, heat up the pin and drop it onto the plastic. And after a few seconds and a few more pins, they will melt down, sink into the plastic, forming part of it and strengthening it, ready for the next step. So here's how the back of the case should look, compared here with an Atari 130 XL. That would have been a lot harder to repair. Really the best way to do this is to rebuild a cage representing each of those slats. And so that's what's happened here. It looks incredible, but it doesn't look like much yet. What we're going to need is some polyester resin and a mold. So here's the mold. It's just an aluminium corner piece from some furniture. And we get our professional polyester resin mix go in here. Pour that into the mold. And then we're going to need a good Atari 800 XL case. Here's a spare. Luckily that was lying around. You dip that in the resin, and when it comes out 24 hours later, peel away the backing, leaving only the front. And there you have it, your Jello mold ready for the cage to slot into. See how nicely that fits in there? So we tape that onto the top piece, place it back into the mold, get our polyester resin again, and pour that in. So we've created a negative mold and then a positive again. "24 hours later, pull it out, and it's not perfect. There's a few too many air bubbles, but that's going to be able to be sanded down, and maybe use some putty as well to smooth out the finish.
Tell me what you want me to do.
But what about the bottom piece? Here's how it should look on our spare case. So what we'll do is close off those holes at the back of the spare case, make a different shaped mold suitable for the bottom piece, place it into the mold, and this time, just to see if we can get some less air bubbles, we're going to use a silicone mold. And 24 hours later, here's what comes out. A complete negative Atari 800 XL. It's sort of an Atari minus 800. And then you guessed it, it's cage time again. Look how nicely that fits into the mold around all the pieces. Really amazing job. And then it's just a question of using the polyester resin again. Kind of looks like candy. Do you want to eat that? Oh, I do like retro computers. Tempting. Well, we do need to finish off those finishes. So we'll get some universal putty here, spread it on nicely. It's like cake batter over the candy. And then once it's sanded down, here's what you're left with. Good enough to eat. But there's one problem. The original has this texturized finish. So what we do is pour some of that polyester resin in a nice blob on top of that texture. You can also use a Atari disk drive or anything with that texture. It doesn't matter about the color. When you peel it off, you get a texturized mold. Place that over where you want to texturize. Pour in some more polyester resin. It should take the shape of that texture. Sand it down a bit more. It wasn't quite what we wanted there. We'll come back to that for a big reveal soon.
Tell me what you want me to do.
But what about this motherboard? Looks okay on the surface, but when you look closer, we've got corrosion here on the CPU. These socketed RAM chips, well, they need to have it socked to them, really. They need resocketing. We've got missing parts, dust. Snapped resistors and capacitors. Even cracks in the board itself. And because the board is actually bent, what we're going to do is put this clamp on it and leave it at about 40 degrees centigrade for a few days to straighten out. we'll take out all the chips and put them in the Retro Recipes deep fat fryer. Oh wait, sorry, it's ultrasonic cleaner. But of course some of the chips are just going to need to be replaced. And here we go, after a nice cleanup, things are looking a bit better. Got our new resistors, new capacitors, and our new chips combined with some of our bathed ones. Once we put them all into place and solder everything in, well, this is looking like the machine it once used to be. So let's plug it in and turn it on. It works. Still a few things we could fix up though. There's this bent piece of the board here which just needs solidifying a bit, become very weak. So we'll get a really tiny drill bit, make a hole in the actual silicone of the board. And then into that hole we can pipe some filler to solidify this job. What about the keyboard surround? You know, this glass or perspex plate has really seen better days, but nothing a good polishing won't restore. Yeah mate, most of that will just buff right out. And when the job's done, it's not perfect, but that is more than good enough. Wow. But those scratches really need something else, so a matching spray paint is used.
Tell me what you want me to do.
Really does match the original color there. Once it dries, you can't really tell the difference between the two halves. Look at that. So we'll finish the job and glue back on those metal plates. That's how it was, and this is how it is now. What a beautiful job. Now in the Atari 800 XL, unlike the Commodore 64, the shielding is actually quite important. It wasn't just an FCC compliance. So let's take a mallet, or a hammer, and panel beat the heck out of it. And finish off with a nice new zinc spray coating. Screw it all back in. And move on to the most daunting task here. This keyboard. Man. You know, we're going to need some new keys. And luckily we do have a spare keyboard. There's how it was. And there's how it's starting to look now. Cleaned up. Let's put on those spare keys. Okay, they're a bit yellow, but hey, look what an improvement this is. Brilliant. Well, let's come back to that case. Everything's had a chance to dry, and we've given it a coat of paint. Can you believe that was the same case as the beginning of this video? But to get that texturized finish all over, we're going to spray some more paint, and while it's wet, place our texturized mold on top of it. Push down firmly, peel it off. That's what you're left with. You can repeat that process all around. Only one thing left. Let's get screwing. Motherboard goes into its new old home. And there's our top case with the keyboard in place. One final thing, the cartridge slot. And finally, the big reveal.
Tell me what
Let's take a tour along with some of those glamour shots. Amazing to think that this is mostly molded and didn't exist. Which means we've got a message for the original owner of this, quote, unrefurbishable Atari 800. I'll drink to that. So as we wrap things up here, I do have one question left. Who wants to peel off this protective film? Comment below and cheerio.